Hello, my name is Sebastian Peterson.
My name is Marcus, and we have drawn the short story Gideon by Z. Packer. And before we begin making an analysis and interpretation of the short story, we will open this screencast by telling about the plot of the story.
The short story is about a Jewish man named Gideon and a black woman who is the narrator of the short story. They're in a relationship and they come from two different backgrounds, and so they do not have anything in common. The narrator describes their life together, and one day while they were making love, the condom breaks. The narrator lies about being pregnant after taking a pregnancy test and tells Gideon that she's pregnant. Gideon reacts different to this piece of news, which makes the narrator freak out, and she leaves the house.
We will now make a characterization on the different characters who appear in the short story. We will now begin with Gideon.
We have marked in red in which information you get about Gideon.
Throughout the story we get various informations about how Gideon's appearance looks like. Already in the first section of the story we are told that Gideon is Jewish, and he has hair like an afro wig, and he has a nervous smile. Further down in the story on page 2, as you can see here, we are told that Gideon is very skinny, and he's very pale. We also get an expression that Gideon is a person who is very stubborn, and a man who thinks he knows it all, and does not need to hear other people's point of view. You can see an example of this on the first page here marked in red. I quote, "He was always opening some musty book, reading it for a while, then closing it and saying, 'You know what's wrong with these facets corporations? No matter how you sprung it, you'll always be wrong,' because he'd say, 'Exactly,' then go on to tell you his theory, which had nothing to do with anything you just said." His stubbornness comes to expression here, but also his Mr. Know-it-all feeling. It seems like he has a need to be right. Even though Gideon is very stubborn and has a need to be right, it seems like that he is a very tolerant and sympathetic bloke. This comes to expression on page 3 while he is talking with the Syrians about the Middle East and Palestinians. I quote, "The Syrian guys who owned the place always made me go and talk to him because they didn't like him. The first couple of times he came in, he tried talking to them about the Middle East and Palestinians and whatnot. Even though he was on their side, they still hated him. Talk to the Jew," they said, whenever he came in. I believe that Gideon is aware of that the Syrians do not like him, but even though he keeps on trying to lead a polite conversation with the Syrians about the disputes, and he has no intention of being provocative against them. This is a bit of a paradox compared to the previously quote, where he had a need to be right, where he had a needing of being right, and he didn't want to hear other points of views. Now we will move on to a characterization of the narrator, which is marked in green. The only outer appearance information we get about the narrator is that she's a black woman. You can see that in the first section of the short story. He was one of those white guys who had a thing for black women, but he had apparently been too afraid to ask out anyone until he met me. Without knowing anything about the narrator's adolescence, it seems like that she had a poor childhood. This comes to expression on page 2. I quote, "If he was successful, he would put it in one of those little jars that once held gourmet items like tapenade and aioli. I'd never heard of these things before, but with the Gideon I'd find myself eating tapenade on fancy store bread." She mentions that she's neither seen or tasted tapenade or aioli before. You typically consider these two food stuff as a delicacy or gourmet items. This could mean that in the narrator's childhood they did not have enough money to buy the finer food products. We are also told that the narrator works in Pizza Delicious, where she serves burgers and falafel. You can see that right here, marked in green. But we're also told that the narrator doesn't have any sort of education, and Gideon is trying to persuade her to begin studying.
Now we would like to talk about the structure of the short story. The short story starts out in a medias res, or in a kind of a flashback, which you can see in the first 6 sentences. After that, the short story is built up chronological. The short story ends in an unpredictable and open ending, which you can see here marked with blue. I quote, "Anyone could have told him that it was too late for us, but Gideon was Gideon, and I could hear him calling after me, hoping the way he always did that the word would do the chasing for him." We think it makes the reader confused and surprised by this open and unpredictable ending. Now we will talk about the language in the short story. The story is built up with simple language and with a bit of a slang in the text. As you can see here, marked with blue, I can quote, "All you can hear was those damn crickets." The story is written in a non-formal and simple language because the story takes place through our narrator. Our narrator is from a low social class and does not have an advanced vocabulary.
If the story had been told through Gideon's point of view, the story would have been told with a high and advanced language. Gideon has almost a PhD, and he comes from a higher social class. Packer also uses a lot of literary devices, such as similes, allusions, contrast, and metaphors. Already in the first section of the short story, Packer uses a simile, here marked in purple. I quote, He had hair like an afro wig and a nervous smile that kept unfolding quickly like origami. The simile makes the language more sparkling and funnier to read, and gives the reader a good and funny illustration of how Gideon's hair and smile looks like.
Further down on the page, Packer uses another simile when the narrator is talking about Gideon's crickets, and it's about here, marked with purple. I quote, "Maybe it was something about the way they formed an orchestra at night." This gives the reader a more figurative impression of how much noise the crickets make.
Packer also uses allusions in his short story. The title of the short story is a biblical allusion. Gideon was a judge of the Hebrews and appears in chapter 6 to 8 in the Hebrew Bible. Gideon means destroyer, and you can compare the meaning of his name to the plot of the story, how he destroys the relationship.
Packer also uses contrasts, and there's an example here marked with purple, and I can quote, "And I'd want to, and then again I wouldn't want to." And that shows that the narrator is confused of what she wants. There are also symbols in this short story. As we mentioned before, Gideon meant destroyer on Hebrew. This could be a symbol of how Gideon destroys their relationship. There's also a symbol down here, marked with orange. I quote, "All around our bed with the sky too hot and the torn screen windows." The torn screen windows could be a symbol of their relationship is weak and sick.
We will now like to discuss and talk about the relationship between the narrator and Gideon. Throughout the story, you never get the feeling of that they really love each other anymore. This comes to expression on page 4, here marked in yellow. I quote, "I should have been relieved to have my lame life back, but not the surprising thing was that I wasn't." As it comes to expression in this quote, the narrator is maybe tired of that the relationship is stuck. Maybe they are too different for each other. The narrator works at a fast food chain, while Gideon is taking an education. She is black, while he is white. and they come from two different social classes. This is what probably makes her lie about her pregnancy test and why she ends up running away from Gideon. She needs difference in her life.
We can also relate the short story to the film Color Purple, because it's also about a black woman who makes a physical protest. In the short story, the narrator leaves Gideon in the end because she wants changes in her life. The same happens in Color Purple when Celie leaves Albert after many years of suppression.
This was our analysis and interpretation of the short story Gideon. Thank you for now.